rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the hope that the dark past has taught. Sing a song full of the faith that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, have a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
10 years after the Civil War, America was becoming an industrial nation, slowly moving from the farm to the cities. Leisure time was now part of the American lifestyle, and sporting events took on new meaning.
Black people felt that there were two problems with sports. One is that it seemed to be sort of wasting time, or you seemed to be not doing any kind of enterprise that seemed to be moving the race forward. And then two was a problem with you're doing this for white people. I mean, the audience for this was mostly white people.
African Americans were in a state of uncertainty. Many who pursued business endeavors faced fierce opposition by whites. As black Americans struggled to find their place in society, they put to use skills learned on the plantation.
A white slave owner who had a lot of slaves would have a number of slaves who were skilled. And a number of these slaves were, of course, groomers and horse trainers.
1875 was the first year of the Run for the Roses, and it showcased the country's best jockeys. 13 of the 14 jockeys were black.
Black people naturally got involved in sport, dealing with some of the activities they were dealing with on the plantation, horses being one of them.
Well, you take back then, all those jocks come out of riding families. All the grooms come out of grooming families. And all the trainers were handed down. You know, that's the way that went.
So you have black people really dominating a sport like horse racing. And that's how you got a legendary name like Isaac Murphy, who won the Kentucky Derby, I believe, 3 times.
Born in Fayette County, Kentucky on New Year's Day, Isaac Murphy was the son of a Union Army soldier who had died in a Confederate prison camp. At age 15, Murphy raced in the first Kentucky Derby. He did not win that day, but his career flourished at a time when black jockeys had few peers.
There was trainers. You had plenty of black trainers. Yeah, you had black jocks. You had it all then.
African-American jockeys won 11 of the first 20 Kentucky Derbies. Isaac Murphy made $10,000 a year, almost 10 times the salary of the average white person, a fact that did not sit well with many Americans. Eventually, the Jockey Club was formed, and blacks were denied licenses to ride. As each year passed, black jockeys slowly disappeared from America's tracks. They left legacies like Isaac Murphy's winning record of 44%, a feat yet to be equaled. By the turn of the century, tolerance for integrated sports was waning. Bicycle racing was one of the most popular sports in the country, and Major Taylor was the fastest bicycle rider in the world. For Taylor, racing was exciting and dangerous.
They were racing through town, and they would go through the main street and then out around the edges of the town, and there were certain groups, and they'd do things like throw broom handles through his spokes, or other riders who would try to bunch up and keep him from getting around them.
Taylor rode on to become the American and 2-time world cycling champion before he was outlawed from racing in the U.S. by the League of American Wheelmen. Even the All-American pastime did not want black Americans. Baseball's foremost player, Cap Anson, refused to play a game against Toledo because Moses Fleetwood Walker was on the team. Anson's actions encouraged an unwritten ban on blacks in Major League Baseball that would last over 50 years. The push for segregation was so strong that the Supreme Court upheld Plessy versus Ferguson, and separate but equal became the law of the land.
We're coming to the end of the century, the beginning of the 20th century, the century that everybody calls the American century, that America was really the special place of Anglo-Saxon destiny. America was going to be the most powerful country on earth. It was going to be the new empire. And also it was commonly believed by many white people that black people were going to die out.
America was divided as never before. White America had suffered the prowess of blacks in many sports. But the sport of sports, boxing, was still a white man's domain. The greatest white boxers had always refused to fight blacks. But now, a new black man was on the scene. He was brash and self-confident, and he could back it up with his fists. His name was Jack Johnson. Considered a great defensive fighter, Johnson made his way in the boxing world by fighting in California, where boxing was big business. By 1907, Johnson had defeated all major black challengers like Sam Langford and Joe Jeanette. He set his sights on the real prize, the heavyweight championship of the world.
This title means a great deal to people because it's sort of like your Mr. American manhood or something. And the idea that a black would be the most idealized man in the United States bothered a lot of people.
Lacking white competition, the beloved heavyweight Jim Jeffries retired a champion. Eventually, a short Canadian named Tommy Burns took the title. Burns was in no hurry to fight Johnson either, and he avoided him.
Jack Johnson had chased Tommy Burns to Australia, where a promoter offered Burns $30,000 to fight Johnson. Burns couldn't receive this type of money fighting a white fighter, so he agreed.
On December 26, 1908, Johnson got his chance.
The belief was that blacks physically were hard-headed and weak in the stomach. Now, Jack Johnson realized this, and so he exposed his stomach. And he kept saying, "Go ahead, hit me, Tommy, hit me, Tommy." And Burns kept trying, and of course, it was hopeless.
Burns was no match for Johnson, and in the 14th round, Johnson knocked Burns out. The camera stopped rolling just short of Burns hitting the canvas. Many Americans said the fight should never have happened. With the victory, Johnson became bolder than ever, flaunting his title and his women.
He was a man whose sex life had suddenly become public. It was a man who was reviled and hated by white people. It was all political. It was all simply that a white man must be heavyweight champion. We can't stand the idea of a black being heavyweight champion.
Almost immediately, the call went out for a great white hope. The reporter Jack London spoke for many Americans.
But one thing now remains. Jim Jeffries must now emerge from his alfalfa farm and remove that golden smile from Jack Johnson's face. Jeff, it's up to you. The white man must be rescued.
Overweight and out of shape, Jeffries declined to fight Johnson, but the call grew louder. After 2 years, Jeffries finally agreed. Promoter Tex Rickard built a stadium in Reno, Nevada to hold the fight.
Reno was beyond the pale anyway. Reno is gambling, Reno is drinking, Reno is prostitution. Reno is the hometown for sports throughout America. The perfect place for the fight. And as the fight drew closer and closer, a tension throughout America builds.
Gamblers, prize fighters, and aristocrats descended upon Reno, forcing the frontier settlement to become a big city almost overnight. America was focused on this desert town in Nevada. A superstitious man, Johnson entered the ring first. The fight of the century was about to begin.
I was 9 years old. They had this fight that was going on someplace, I don't know, remember where it was, but I do know that Jack Johnson was fighting Jeffries. The young boys would come out on the bicycles from Western Union to bring the rounds, you know.
By round 15, Jeffries was bleeding and swollen. Johnson had victory at hand. As he piled up points, the only person seen rooting for him was his wife, Etta Duryea. With each punch landed, Johnson chipped away at the ideals of the nation. Never again would the heavyweight title be only the white man's domain.
And when the fight ended, it was just silence. Nobody cheered. People filtered out of the stadium as if it was a wake, as if they were mourning the passing of something, which they were.
When they said that he had knocked out, that Jack Johnson knocked out Jeffries, well, the place was just in an uproar. Everybody was so happy.
As soon as the fight ended, the riots began.
Invariably, blacks were killed. In New York, throughout the South, in cities large and small, and they would just attack. White mobs would attack blacks.
Johnson returned to Chicago. His drinking and carousing increased. Often short on cash, he fought any great white hope sent his way. Openly taunting his challengers, Johnson's showboating was considered a bad example for the nation's Negroes. The FBI launched a movement to rid the country of the champ. 1 month after Jeffries' defeat, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis charged Johnson with transporting white women across state lines for immoral purposes. Found guilty, Johnson fled the country. When he returned years later, he returned not as a champion, rather as a criminal. Across America, blacks were shut out of all aspects of mainstream American life. D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation reflected the beliefs and sympathies of many Americans. African Americans looked to their own communities for survival, and the Harlem Renaissance was born. Harlem was an inspiration to scientists, thinkers, and artisans. Stage plays, new forms of music, and economic strides energized the black community. For the first time outside of sports, African Americans were becoming international stars. Even so, one of the most noted got his start on the gridiron.
I was told when I was a kid, well, we want you to go be Paul Robeson, you know, I mean, Paul Robeson was right up there with W.B. Du Bois. I don't know of any other black athlete who was quite seen in that way as Paul Robeson is, as this kind of quintessential scholar athlete.
In the 20s, Paul Robeson was scoring points on the American stage. His versatility allowed him to play Othello or sing in concert. But his career actually began by making touchdowns on the field. After attaining the highest marks ever achieved on the New Jersey high school exam, Robeson entered Rutgers University in 1915 on an academic scholarship. That same year, Frederick Douglass Pollard entered Brown University. As the only black members of their teams, playing the game held special challenges.
They called me all the niggas in the world. But I kept on making long runs and didn't get laid out and whatnot, so they just stopped.
Pollard played in the very first Rose Bowl game and was the first black running back named to Walter Camp's All-American list. He slowly gained the respect of his teammates, and they did what they could to ensure he would be able to play.
They wouldn't allow me to have a place to change my clothes. I had to change my clothes in the cigar store, and I had to get a cab and with 2 or 3 white fellas and go from there. And the Brown team went out there, and I had to go after just 3 or 4 or 5 minutes before they blew the whistle. And we had it all figured out.
Pollard went on to become the first African-American quarterback and head coach in professional football. As coach of the Akron Pros, he was highly regarded, especially by his one black player, Paul Robeson. Eventually, the NFL would ban blacks, and regardless of his winning record, Fritz Pollard would be out of a job. It would take over 50 years before the NFL would have its second black head coach. Paul Robeson would achieve superstardom off the field. As the progress of the 20s marched on, even Jack Johnson found redemption. Now, leisure sports became part of the Black American lifestyle. African Americans formed sports clubs. One of the most enduring was the American Tennis Association, ATA, which organized matches and events across the Eastern Seaboard.
They had farmers, luncheons, and things going on, especially for those that didn't play. They always had a lot of activities. And they ran the tournaments, one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen in my life, because it was run perfectly. Perfect. Beautiful. And I learned a lot.
The 1920s was a time when some Black Americans attained a small piece of the American dream. But like players in the ATA, they did so in their own world, separate and unequal. The most renowned heroes of the Black sporting world were the men who took part in the All-American pastime. Originally formed in the 20s by premier pitcher Rube Foster, the National Negro League flourished and then died as the Great Depression took hold of America. By the early 1930s, the country was in despair. Breadlines were commonplace, and economic opportunity was a scarce commodity. The Depression hit hardest in the Black neighborhoods, where it was already tough to get a break or get a job. But the self-reliance movement begun by segregation and fostered during the Renaissance led to the rebirth of the Negro Leagues.
1932, we played the first recognized Black World Series. Yankee Stadium, we had 47,000. We played the New York Lincoln Giants. Satchel Paige pitched the first game and I caught him. In the 7th inning, I hit a home run in the upper deck with the bases loaded and drove in 4 runs, and we beat him.
The biggest rivalry was between the team owned by Gus Greenlee, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and the Homestead Grays, owned by Com Posey.
Gus only knew people in the rackets. Com himself, out in Homestead where he lived, he was on the school board, he was a councilman. The two were just different.
Homestead is right outside of Pittsburgh. Over there, they had some of the best ball players in the league. There are fellas like Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard and those kind of people, you know. And they were a rivalry.
We played 4 games a day. You ever heard of that? We played 9:45 in the morning, 1:45, then get in the bus, go 50 miles down to Virginia, cross the line and play. When we get back home, go to bed at 5 o'clock. And my wife would fix me a steak or some pork chops or something. When I wake up the next morning, they're still on the table. I just went to sleep and left it. So tired.
The owners kept their teams alive by a part-time schedule of games against other league members and by barnstorming, traveling around the countryside playing against hometown teams in the North and the South.
They just had these old rickety buses ride in because Jim Crow trains were not for these players.
Sometime you could be in a town down south in Alabama or Mississippi. They'd want you to go in the back of a restaurant and sit on a box and eat. And some of the boys had too much pride, they wouldn't do it. And if you pick up the holes to drink some water, you say, put them holes down, nigga. White folks will get you a Coca-Cola bottle. It was awful. We took a beating. But if we don't keep playing, they wouldn't be playing today.
You know, there was an accommodation that we as a people learned to make to that sort of thing. When you can't do anything about something, you make it a stepping stone for something else that makes you happy.
In Black baseball, you had a business that involved only people of color. The ball clubs were African American, the owners were African American, the sites where they played were African American in the main. At that time, the only other businesses we had that was run by black people were a few newspapers and insurance companies. This is the one phase of sports that they owned and dictated how the game was to be run.
Despite the hardship of the times, the players of the Negro Leagues were becoming legends in the black communities where they played.
I didn't know anything about Major League Baseball. There was no blacks in baseball. There was no talk about blacks ever getting a chance to play in baseball. I liked Buck Leonard and Josh Gibson, you know.
The most colorful character of all was a tall, self-assured pitcher named Satchel Paige.
Now you talking about something. He ain't never be no more like him, I don't think. We used to call everybody off the field but me and him, and as fast as they come up there, he'd mow them down.
People saying that you could make the ball look like a pea. He could make the ball look smaller than anybody I ever faced. He threw hard.
I could throw pretty straight. I couldn't. I came up from down in Mobile when I was throwing rocks like you heard him say. I could throw rocks straight. I used to kill birds with rocks. There's no maybe so about it.
Judy Johnson, Jimmy Crutchfield, and Double Duty Ratcliffe to see him pitch a game in the morning, then catch one in the afternoon. And Oscar Owens, my favorite, 150-pounder for the Homestead Grays, who could pitch 5 innings with his left hand and the next 4 innings with his right hand, all in the same game. And don't you think people didn't turn out to see that?
The Negro Leagues provided something to look forward to in these hardest of hard times. At the depth of the Great Depression, they staged the rivalry of rivalries, the East-West All-Star Classic. Held in August each year, it became so popular that even the white press covered the game.
First year we played, we draw 19,000. That was nothing. The next year we draw 43. Then we went up to 57,000. And we packed them in.
The ladies used to come to the ballpark all dressed up like they come from church or something, you know.
I can remember how exciting it was. Yes, it was an exciting time.
And the games were always good. 2-1, 4-3, never 6-0, never 10-0. They were very, very close games.
African Americans took pride in their teams, and they were proudest when their idols played against the white major leaguers.
We played the Yankee Stadium on a Friday night and a Sunday afternoon. And I pitched against Satchel Paige, and we had 2 great ball games. They won 1, we won 1. We had over 100,000 people in Yankee Stadium for those 2 ball games.
I got to see all these ball players in action. Ted Williams and Ty Cobb, and I got to see them, and I also had an opportunity to see the Negro League players. And it said to me that here's something wrong.
Anybody played in our league could play to that. That's the way I felt, you know, because when we started Barnstone with them, we ran them all over the country, so much so that their commissioner stopped complaining.
Prohibited play between the 2 leagues because barnstorming games competed with major games. And so the ban on admittance of blacks into the white majors continued. And to much of white America, the National Negro League remained unknown. In the less popular sport of basketball, the Depression destroyed the organized league. The only way to survive was to play any team, black or white. All takers were welcome, anything to stay alive. The most successful were the Renaissance Big Five, the Wrens, and the original Celtics.
The Wrens and the Celtics were not afraid to play off of what they knew was the fans' anticipation of a white team beating a black team or a black team beating a white team.
Robert Douglas fulfilled his dream when he formed the Wrens. They were the black team to beat.
We were ducking because ducking hadn't been thought of about that time. But the ball handling per se was very exceptional.
They all could run. Pat Jenkins was like a blur. You know, the man would steal the ball from him before he'd get halfway down the court. Jenkins had overtaken him and gotten the ball back and came flying back up the court.
That was our forte: speed, good ball handling, good ball passing, and perfect defense.
Skill was not enough. Basketball teams had to go to the fans to make a living.
Barnstorming was an experience in its own. I was from the North, and the things that happened below the cotton curtain was something that you had to learn to deal with.
Imagination also helped to bring in the fans. Originally a serious basketball team, Abe Saperstein's Harlem Globetrotters barely survived. But as their antics became their game, they became stars.
A lot of people have a misconception. They thought the Trotters couldn't play. These fellas could play. But they found out it was more advantageous to them to do what they did.
White audiences and the white media was being drawn much more to the Globetrotters, giving them more accolades because it fit, again, this white stereotype of what black people were supposed to be like.
Other teams relied on serious competition to bring in the fans. Over time, the Wrens and Celtics developed a friendship that only respect and mutual dependence could foster.
It was a friendship of knowing each other and a warm friendship of trying to beat the other dude that's trying to beat you. And we all respect each other for that, because that was what the ball game was all about.
The Wrens became two-time world champions, yet officially considered only Negro champs. When the season ended, their success on the court was not enough to carry them throughout the year.
When you got finished playing basketball, like I said, you had to put some grips on the table. You better hurry to get yourself a job. You had to worry about paying Mr. Charlie at the end of the month, pay your rent and so forth, things like that.
Here were guys that played at the top of the game who were, in several cases, inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, became painters, became bus drivers, became cab drivers, and the one who became a New York City policeman went off duty and called to a burglary scene when the white uniformed cops arrived, gunned him down because they thought he was the burglar.
Racial divisions ran deep as Americans desperately tried to pull themselves out of the doldrums. Mass protests were prompted by news from Germany about the treatment of Jews.
The principle that all citizens stand equal before the law is a test of civilized government. Mr. Hitler's violation of these common rights in their application to Jewish citizens of Germany is a challenge to civilization.
In the spring of 1936, the world prepared to send its athletes to Berlin for the Olympic Games. Rumor of a boycott was spread as Americans grappled with the question of equality in Germany. A second-class citizen at home, Ohio State track star Jesse Owens was America's hope for Olympic glory.
He was a beautiful runner, running just like a machine. It was beautiful to watch him run. Perfect form, perfect.
Owens burst upon the track scene at the National Intercollegiates in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He set 3 world records and tied a 4th in the span of 45 minutes to become an immediate celebrity. As the Olympics approached, Owens' fame continued to grow.
I'm going to try to bring back 3 crowns, that is in the 100 meters, 200 meters, and the broad jump.
The U.S. Olympic team set sail for Berlin on the SS Manhattan on July 15th. The opening ceremonies were conducted amidst Nazi ideology and the Olympic philosophy of world unity.
That was very exciting. And all these various countries marched into the stadium. Very, very exciting. We had blue blazers, white trousers, straw hat, with these flat top straw hats with the red, white, and blue striped band.
Hitler opened the games with the hope of proving his theory of Aryan superiority. His racial propaganda was challenged on the second day when Jesse Owens set a world record in the 100 meters and won the gold.
Owens is ahead. Sundberg and Borsmeyer are fighting. Osendorf challenges Wyckoff. Metcalf comes up, but Owens wins in 10.3. The competition was grand, and we're very glad to come out on top. Thank you very kindly.
Some observers said that after Owens' performance, Hitler no longer personally congratulated the athletes. But Owens was not finished. The next day, he shattered the Nazi beliefs by setting 2 Olympic records and winning the gold in the broad jump and the 200 meters.
And what's so significant about Jesse's performance is that every time he stepped foot on the track, he tied a record. And this is what caused his popularity. Jesse, Jesse, that's all they were saying.
2 things happened when Owens became the big champion. It was discovered that all Americans can sort of rally around and identify with a black person symbolizing their country. That's very important. The other thing was that people saw the Olympics as basically being a confrontation between the United States and Nazi Germany.
Other black Americans challenged Hitler's assertions as well. John Woodruff's 800-meter final amazed spectators.
I decided to use a little strategy to run in second position and try to preserve my kick. Then all the other athletes crowded right around me, see. And I couldn't get out of this box. So the only way that I could get out without fouling somebody was to stop. I stopped. Let the athletes proceed ahead of me. I ran out into the 3rd lane and ran around them and won the race. In fact, I ran more than 800 meters to win the race, you see.
These accomplishments tore at the fabric of Hitler's theories. America, despite its racial beliefs, seemed to pull together for its athletes, black and white, until the 400-meter relay. Jesse Owens and John Wyckoff were substituted for the 2 Jewish members of the Olympic team, Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller.
We never knew why, but we kind of felt that it was because of their religion that they weren't permitted to run, you see. But that was not right.
The triumph of the black athletes and the omission of the Jewish ones led many Americans to question their beliefs about race, religion, and tolerance. The Olympic team returned from Berlin, American heroes. Jesse Owens returned to offers for endorsements that never came to be. Stripped of his amateur status because he did not run exhibition meets in Europe, Owens was faced with making a living during the Great Depression.
He was reduced to, at one time, racing horses. Maybe some people considered it entertaining, and I thought it was demeaning personally. But he had to stay alive.
Jesse Owens temporarily fell on hard times. Eventually, his image as a clean-cut American hero would pull him through. The mid-30s bore yet another African-American star. After 22 years, the country was willing to welcome a black boxer back into the media spotlight. But Joe Louis bore no resemblance to his predecessor.
The idea is they want no association in the American mind between Jack Johnson and Joe Louis. When Jack Johnson would try to come to a Joe Louis camp, he was thrown out. They were both black, but there the comparison ends.
Louis received lessons in personal hygiene and proper table manners. He was instructed to knock out his challengers rather than risk a judge's decision. Above all, he was advised not to smile after beating a white opponent.
For white Americans, he was considered respectful.
Thank you.
He wasn't a particularly articulate man. He was quiet by nature.
Oh, I felt fine, because I had a tough fight, and I had a fight, fought a tough man.
I never heard the man brag. Whenever he won, he was lucky. Joe Louis had the greatest impact on my life. The kind of person that I wanted to be.
Lewis's skill astonished many people.
A tremendous left hook by Lewis. Lewis is in
His
trouble.
only loss had been to the German Max Schmeling in June 1936.
Lewis goes down.
Joe Louis was becoming a household name.
Now let us talk about the brown bomber. Let us tell the nation this story. Let us talk about the brown bomber. Joe Louis was a fighting man. Well, now stop, let me tell you this.
He had us all walking the street with boxing gloves around our neck, working out on the corner.
He was a great fighter, great fighter. And of course, when Joe Louis went past the second round and didn't knock somebody out, everybody thought, is he losing it, you know, one of those things. They expect so much of you, you know, when you get great.
I know this to be a fact in my hometown. Both the white and black churches, if he's fighting on Wednesday night, there was no prayer meeting.
That generation thought of Joe Louis as God because here was a man, the way they saw it, who had black management, who stood up and fought these fights mostly against white opponents. He had very few black opponents.
At age 23, Louis got a shot at the title. For African Americans, everything was riding on the fight. The champ, James Braddock, at age 32, was still the favorite.
I feel very confident that I'll stop Joe Louis inside of 8 rounds.
Of the 45,000 people attending the championship bout at Comiskey Park, almost half were African American. Louis was knocked down in the first round. Black America's heart skipped a beat.
I dusted, I wiped the floor up. I did everything to keep busy, to keep from dropping dead if he lost. Because that's the way we felt about him.
Louis waited for time to take its toll on the champ. By the 8th round, Joe was in command of the fight. 1 minute and 10 seconds later, he became the new heavyweight champion of the world. The Brown Bomber was king.
Now let us talk about the brown bomber.
He would open his own night spot. He would have a soda named after him. And he would star in Hollywood movies.
I want to get ahead.
Joe came along at a time when we needed a hero. We needed a symbol. Remember this, he was the symbol for all classes, the poor, the medium, white collar, blue collar, no collar. He carried them all.
Although Joe Louis was becoming an all-American hero, in Lewis's mind, he had one more test before he would consider himself the champ. He wanted a rematch with the one opponent who had put him down, Germany's Max Schmeling. But war was on the horizon.
Never before has our American civilization been in such danger as now. Danger against which we must prepare.
And so Joe Louis, Max Schmeling took on kind of an international good guys versus bad guys. Now Joe Louis personified America, an America that transcended race. I think also he was important for the idea that we are fighting a Nazi racist ideology, and that by embracing Louis, it said something about us. It said that we do not follow the same ideology.
The first time I've ever heard an announcer call a black man an American was in the Schmeling and Joe Louis fight. They called Joe Louis the American. And you know, that just sort of cut me deep.
On June 22nd, 1938, a calm Joe Louis weighed in at 198 pounds.
Well, the 10-second buzzer came on, and Joe turned around. He looked at Schmeling, and before the 10 seconds was up, the bell rang. He just moved towards him.
Around the country, the streets were deserted. Everyone was listening to the fight.
I don't think there was a black household that didn't. And if you didn't have a radio, you went 3 or 4 blocks to your neighbor who had a radio. Remember now, everybody didn't have radios in those days.
An explosive right to the jaw hurts Max Schmeling. Joe Louis all over Max Schmeling here in round 1. Ripping punches to the head. Joe steps back.
The second right hand that hit him,
A dynamite right to the jaw.
it sounded like someone smacked a wet rag all over Yankee Stadium. It looked like it paralyzed the muscles in Schmeling's face. His mouth flew open, and his eyes were glazed, and that was it. I never got a chance to take any notes. Then, of course, my boss from the paper, he didn't get a chance to see anything.
Ripping punches by the Brown Bomber sends Schmeling down again.
He fought Maxton second time.
Working right.
Knocked him down to the ground. Way down in Jericho. Now, million people, they all were glad. That's the battle of Jericho. Greatest champ we've ever had. Way down in Jericho. Now let us talk about the Brown.
Yeah, I was one of those guys that ran out the house with a keyboard and radio. They have television that time, ran up down the street. Yeah, I remember what he wanted.
And now, the entire white sports writing community has completely turned in his favor. This was the fight that transformed Joe Louis into the great American hero. He was to maintain that status for as long as he lived, really. It probably has been no black athlete as beloved as Joe Louis.
In 1941, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, America was drawn into war. Japanese Americans were forced into internment camps, and young black men eager to serve signed up in order to fight for democracy abroad. Blacks were assigned to all black units with white commanders. Jim Crow extended even into the armed forces.
White men refused to be in the same companies with blacks. They refused to be in the same regiments, the same Navy with blacks, and they wanted to keep it that way.
The government pumped money into the American economy to support the war effort, and the Great Depression came finally to an end. Jim Crow laws made it tough for African Americans to take part in the new prosperity. Black labor leader A. Philip Randolph proposed a march on Washington. The threat of massive protest persuaded President Roosevelt to force government employers to hire African Americans. As blacks began to work side by side with their white countrymen, the march toward democracy at home gained momentum. Many African Americans protested, and some began to ask the unthinkable. Why couldn't blacks play in Major League Baseball? Black sports writers spearheaded a campaign to reintegrate the All-American pastime.
I would write to the owners and ask them if they felt that this was a proper thing to do. And I constantly petitioned Judge Landis, who was a commissioner of baseball at that time. But he never would give me an opportunity to talk to him.
In the fall of 1944, the man who had indicted Jack Johnson and fervently upheld the unwritten ban on blacks in baseball died of a heart attack.
I can't say that Landis's death gave me any particular pleasure, because I think death should not be pleasurable to anyone. But I did see an opportunity.
And it seemed that everybody who happened to be black who was a baseball player wanted to play in the major leagues, wanted a chance, but then there were a lot of black people who didn't want that to happen.
The contention was that by working for desegregation, it meant throwing a lot of Negro baseball players out of work.
As the war continued, the Negro Leagues flourished. They drew larger crowds than the white major leagues, who used replacement players for those gone to war. Even an all-girls professional baseball league was formed rather than recruit a black player. These actions did not deter black sports writers in their crusade for equality on the field. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, and the Second World War ended. Black columnist Ralph Matthews wrote, "After our armies have marched on Berlin and Tokyo, if the G.I. Joes, both colored and white, don't turn around and march on Washington, they will not have learned what they were fighting for."
Black people have become more assertive as a result of the war, and also it was becoming more and more difficult for whites to sort of fall back on the idea of custom to support racist ideology, because racism has seemed to be this horrible thing, and look what's been caused in the world as a result of this racism.
Our immediate task.
After President Roosevelt's mid-war death, Harry S. Truman took another step toward democracy.
There is no justifiable reason
for discrimination because of ancestry or religion or race or color.
In 1946, the unwritten ban on black players was lifted in Major League sports. Not on the diamond, but on the gridiron. In March, the Los Angeles Rams recruited Woody Strode. In August, the NFL's rival, the All-American Football Conference, AAFC, signed 2 black players to their star team, the Cleveland Browns.
One of the greatest running backs of all time, Marion Motley, was on that team. Bill Willis is a Pro Football Hall of Famer. And you can go on and name several other players who were on the team at that time who were of African-American descent, who figured very prominently in the success of the Cleveland Browns.
Before the free substitution rule, players performed on offense and defense. Marion Motley played fullback and linebacker, a situation that kept him constantly in the game and constantly in harm's way.
If a guy hit me or something, or knocked my helmet off or something, I'd go get him and turn him around. He said, "What you doing, Motley?" I said, "I'm getting your number." I said, "'Cause, you know, we played twice. We play you twice. If I don't get you today, I'll get you the next time." I could either run over him, or either on defense, I'd get him and hit him with an elbow.
Motley and Willis, like their African-American countrymen, no longer turned the other cheek. They were fighting back in their own ways, and they were gaining allies.
For 3 years, it went on. I would be getting up off the ground, and the referee would be standing, reaching for the ball. And when I'd get up, put my hand to push up off the ground, the player would take his foot and... But those days, they had that hard rubber cleats. All my hand was scarred up and blood just running everywhere. And they never say anything. So finally one day, the referee saw it, and he picked the ball up and started walking. So the guy that stepped on my hand, he said, "What the hell is that for?" He said, "Shut up and play ball. You know what it's for." Walked off 15 yards and put the ball down. And that was the beginning of the change of the referees giving us a break.
3 years after it began, the AAFC folded into the NFL. 17 years after the merger, the NFL would be integrated on the field. Football and basketball admitted blacks with little notice. The baseball owners held out as long as they could. But the black sports writers' crusade was finally paying off.
Sam Lacey, Wendell Smith, Joe Bostic, and all those pioneers, they were the ones that opened the doors. They were the ones that opened eyes to the wrongness of the fact that these men could go away, fight and die, and they couldn't play Major League Baseball. They thought it was a crime. And it was a shame.
Still, it would take a special man to buck convention. When the co-owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, Branch Rickey, embarked upon his experiment to reintegrate baseball, he faced the ire of the nation.
Branch Rickey believes in 2 things about sports. He just really thought it's unfair if people have talent to not be able to play a sport or do whatever it is they want to do. And the other is his belief in expanding economic markets.
Black All-Stars could draw 45 and 50,000 people in Comiskey Park. There was money there. And later, when I got to know Mr. Rickey better, he said one thing they noticed: black people did not patronize white ball, but they did patronize their own.
Rickey signed a quick-tempered ex-Army lieutenant who had played briefly in the Negro Leagues. Jackie Robinson was signed to the Dodgers' top farm team, the Montreal Royals. Like Joe Louis before him, Robinson was required to sign a contract that dictated his behavior. It stipulated that he could not show public rebuke for any actions taken against him for 3 years.
When Branch Rickey told Jackie that you can't fight back, he meant it, because if you fight back, there's going to be riots. There's going to be people who will be killed because there will be this black man beating up and fighting with this white man. And that kind of thing can't happen. So, Jackie, if you can't do it my way, Branch Rickey would say to him, then there'll be no way at all.
He wasn't the type person to take that, not Jackie. He was very hot-headed. Can you imagine not being able to open his mouth or say anything in his own favor? It destroyed him from within.
Jackie was the right man at the right time. Although he was not the best ball player, I felt that he was the kind of person who would adjust more quickly.
The signing of a black baseball player to the minor leagues drew nationwide criticism.
My dad was hired by Branch Rickey. What I remember about my dad's reaction was that he was not for it in the beginning.
If you were of what was then considered to be liberal, and was not a bad word to be a liberal in those days, obviously you were on Jackie Robinson's side and you cheered what he did. If you was then called a conservative, and probably still is called a conservative, you probably were not happy.
I never will forget what a manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates said in 1946. He said they're hiring them niggas now, the white boy gonna have to look for a job. That's what he said.
Despite opposition from the fans, the press, and members of the Dodgers organization, Branch Rickey completed the first phase of his plan. The second part was to sign a catcher, Roy Campanella, and a pitcher, Don Newcomb, who both went quietly to the New England minor league. On April 15th, 1947, Jackie Robinson became a first baseman for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
He was a symbol of the destruction of the major league mind. He was the person that they resented most because he was the one who had done the job.
Robinson accepted his position and turned his anger into scores.
Jackie Robinson hit that ball. It went zooming.
Blacks were thrilled to see the reintegration of baseball.
Yes, Jackie hit that ball.
But it also marked the beginning of the end for the Negro Leagues.
Satchel Paige is mellow, so is Campanella. Newcomb and Doby too. But it's a natural fact, when Jackie comes to bat, the other team is through.
He wound up defining the role of a leader of the team. I don't know how many times he stole home in any one particular year. I just know that he won ball games by stealing home plate. It was incredible, I mean, what he did.
Eventually, Robinson was joined by Campanella and Newcomb. Branch Rickey did what he could to shelter them, but there was nothing he could do once they were on the field.
I remember one day in Cincinnati, we were on our team bus getting ready to go to the baseball stadium, and Jackie had a letter. In the letter it said, if you niggas come out to that baseball stadium today, we're going to shoot all of you, because today is your last day to be with the Dodgers and play in this game of baseball. I said to Jackie after reading the letter, I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going. I said, Roy, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going. And I said to Jackie, oh, I'm going out with you. If we die today, we're going to die together.
Dad went into Mr. Rickey and said, nobody can continue to take this stuff. This guy is going through stuff that no human being should be asked to endure. Mr. Rickey says, you're an honest, fair man, and people are going to react the same way as you do. This will not go on.
Racial taunts would continue at a diminishing rate for years to come. But Jackie Robinson had instilled in himself and his teammates a will to survive, to persevere, and above all, to win.
I thought that Jackie was the forerunner of what was going to be an equal society. Ideally, that's what a lot of people thought. As I said, it didn't quite turn out that way.
All we wanted was a chance to show that we were Americans like everybody else, because if baseball was known as the great all-American sports pastime, why wasn't it all Americans then were not given the chance to play the game?
Other Negro Leaguers, like Satchel Paige, eventually made it to the majors. But it would take 10 more years before each team had at least one black player. The long road to integration had only just begun in an America long separate and unequal. country had endured decades of turmoil, yet it moved toward the America it believed itself to be. And along that journey, African-American athletes gave strength to a people unwanted and misunderstood.
Well, they're real pioneers. When you talk about Marion Motley, Jesse Owens.
Fellows like Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard.
Joe Louis, Jackie Robinson.
The Larry Dolbys, the Monty Irvins, the Satchel Paige.
People of that stripe were opening up the eyes of America.
And they were opening doors for those yet to come.
I said, now God, bless America. It is a land. It is the land that I love.
That's what the American sport's about. We all came to America in different boats, but we're all in the same boat now.
Well, God want you guide.
And that's what these United States is supposed to be all about. A good life for all people, regardless of the status or the texture of their skin.
From the mountain to the valley, down to the ocean, wide God bless America, 'cause it's my home.